common good. So it has been elaborated through a deep thinking about the management of the society. And then came the Industrial Revolution, a completely new stage for humanity, what is described as Anthropocene, with a new ability to mobilize outside resources. Mobilizing outside resources is not very new. That was a challenge for most empires in the ancient times. First of all, the Roman Empire, which would only find its equilibrium by bringing new conquests and new tributes. Although it was limited altogether by the techniques, by the transportation, etc. Industrial revolution creates a completely new situation. First of all, the mobilization, of course, of fossil energy, lifting what had been historically one of the major constraints of accumulation, which was the scarcity of energy and the need to reproduce energy and fertility of soils. And then from that time, we could see that the name economy took its own freedom. And this is expressed by the fact that economy is presented as a scientific discipline as such, separate from the political science, separate from sociology and so on and so forth. And you have to understand what happened in terms of epistemology when economy, to build its own so-called scientific status, got inspiration from the Newtonian mechanics and from chemistry. All the vocabulary and most of the representations of economy directly relate to the 18th century natural sciences. What is fascinating about economy is the inertia of the process. I mentioned inertia about governance, about democracy, about university. But the most striking inertia is about economy. Just think of it. Did nature change over the last 2 centuries? Do physical realities change over the last centuries? The answer is no. However, natural science have undertaken 2 or 3 or more intellectual revolutions. The way we represent physics or chemistry had nothing to do with the way we would represent it in the 18th century. Right? And what about society and economy? It has completely changed from the time Adam Smith was writing about the wealth of nations. Nothing to do with the state of the society at that time, right? And what happened about economy? The predicament remained unchanged. And you are taught exactly the principles which have been built in the 18th century, exactly the same way as representative democracy at a national level is presented as the paramount of democracy. As if the means and the scales of democracy have not changed. So, this is a very simple demonstration that economy is not a science, but an ideology. It has nothing to do with the representation of the real world. It has to do with the elaboration of a vision of the world which is meant to convince you to adhere to that vision. Well, economy is an analogy. Now, the fact that we decide to free the passion for accumulation, not only to free the passion for accumulation, but the fact that the very equilibrium of the system relates on growth, just like the equilibrium of the Roman Empire would rely on conquest. The day the Roman Empire would not grow, it was going to implode. Just for thermodynamic reasons, the entropy of the system was not balanced by introducing nega-entropia. So, for very technical reasons, our system of accumulation is at stake as soon as it becomes steady, and everybody gets mad about recession, and everybody now is talking about steady state economy. It's a joke. It doesn't exist, steady state economy, because it finds its own equilibrium on growth. That's why over the last 20 years we have built a lot of oxymoron. Green economy, a joke. Sustainable development, a joke. So, when we go back to the previous fork in the forest, what do we find? First of all, we find that most societies had to live on a limited environment and resources. So, most of the knowledge of pre-industrial society was precisely about the balance between human activity and resources. And therefore, this had developed a lot of systems of regulation and a lot of systems of knowledge. I will give you a very brief example. Let's take a Chinese village 4,000 years from now. And let's take the city of Turin right now. Which one has a good knowledge of its own metabolism? Which one? The Chinese village or Turin?
The Chinese village.
Chinese village. Why? Because it's a matter of mere survival. So they had to know in depth the way to use the waste, the way to reproduce energy, the way to control the use of biomass, and all the taboos, all the social regulation was about survival, was about making the best of very limited resources, right? And why Turin does not know anything about its metabolism? You know why? Because of the monetary economy. You go to the supermarket. Have you any idea of how much energy, how much natural resources, how much human work is embodied in the good you buy? Absolutely not. Do you have any idea when euros get in Turin? What's the use of it? Does it go quickly outside by buying imported goods? Or does it circulate inside the community and create richness? You have absolutely no idea. So modern economy has created ignorance about the way the society goes. Now, before that, at the time when we had to create well-being for the population in the respect of the limit of the environment. How would we call it? We would call it economy. And if you look after, just use Google and look economy, and you will discover that it was a word which was used until the 18th century. Why is it so important now? Because when you see economy, you think about etymology. What was economy? There's a very smart definition by the great botanist Carl von Linné, Swedish great botanist. Heard about Carl von Linné, who played a major role in the classification of plants. He gives an incredibly modern definition of economy. The art of creating well-being for all the family, or for all the state, or for all the city, from limited environment, which equilibrium you have to protect on the long term. And now, what is our today's challenge? What is the production and consumption system about? Creating well-being for humanity while respecting the limits of the planet. So, the reality of our challenge today about production and consumption is extremely similar to the one which existed before the industrial age, before Anthropocene age of humanity, when the balance of the planet, the evolution of the planet, is deeply dependent on human activities. So the first reason to adopt economy is to say that it was no use to invent new complex words, economy, ecology, green economy, steady economy, degrowth economy. The word exists. It has existed for years, for centuries. It's creating well-being for everybody in the limits of the planet. And therefore, it's useful to see how we did. Because if we have created ignorance in the meantime, maybe it would be wise to try and recollect the knowledge that we had in the previous situation. That's a way to be radical, go back to the roots. Not to say we are getting back to the bluff and to horse riding. I don't mean that. I mean social knowledges about the regulation to be built. The other reason to be interested in etymology is, what does this mean in Greek, economy? Who can tell me? There are two words.
Oikos and nomos.
Right. And what is oikos?
House.
Domestic.
Yeah, at the beginning it was house, and nomos?
Law or...
Yeah, the rule, the law. So, when you are trained about economy, they will tell you it's a branch of science which has built the nomoi, the rules in terms of scientific laws, in order to run we don't know what, because we have forgotten oikos. Therefore, there's a semantic trick here. What we mean by nomoi, by the rules. Is it scientific rules about supply and demand? Or is it human rule of regulation? Right? And of course, economy is about human rules of regulation. How do we regulate? This is the issue of economy, not the issue of building equations. I'm a mathematician myself, so I love equations. Because I'm a mathematician, I'm very clear on the fact that economy, the way you are taught, is mere ideology. Nothing to do with natural laws, nothing to do, including the Homo economicus and so on and so forth, and rational decision. This is tricks, right? So the norma you are talking about are the rules. And what is the oikos now? It's about the planet. We started to talk about economy, farming economy. I have a wonderful book from the 17th century in my own library, which is called Rural Economy. Wonderful book explaining how do you do with using the blood of the animals you have killed, how do you do with the wastes, incredibly modern approach of what we call now circular economy, closing the circles. Because if you would not close the circles of carbon and nitrogen, you were dead. You were dead. So circular economy is one of the ways to rediscover what has been done from the eve of humanity. But now we have to think it at the level of the oikos. And therefore I ask myself, it's nice to go back to an old word and try to popularize it, and I hope over the years now it's coming. People talk more and more about economy. You would have looked at Google 5 years ago. You would have seen that the only quotation was my book and was Van Linné and books from the 18th century. Now you can see new people talking about economy. That's a good news for me. But there is something much more important, which is about the mnemonics, the rules. I was so upset with the fact that so many intelligent people would say we have to invent a new paradigm and never say how to invent it. So I said I have to invent it myself. Because if nobody wants to help you, the task remains the task, right? When you're a human being, the task remains the task. And the question I was confronting was this one. Present economy is ideology and doesn't reflect the real stage of the society, right? But it has a great power of seduction. Not only because it supports the interest of huge actors, but also because it gives the feeling that you understand the world. Let's go back to what you are trained for. Classical economies will give you intelligibility of the world from the behavior of the individual consumer to the regulation of the global economies. So it's wrong, but it's coherent. And that's a very strong argument. So I came to a very simple conclusion. If we are not able to build an alternative system which would have its own coherence, we lose. Because we are just bare hands in front of tanks, right? So I asked myself, where this coherence can come from in economy? And I found the answer very simply, say, let's go back to the etymology. Economy is about governance. It's principle of governance applied to production and consumption. Therefore, had the beginning of the answer. Why? Because I mentioned as a third challenge the revolution of governance. So I've been working for years, first as a practitioner, as a senior civil servant for 20 years in France, then as an observer of what was going on all around the world. And there I could build some theory of governance. And that would be a matter of another conference that will only give some ideas of it to understand how to apply it to economy. Governance, the art to manage societies, has three characteristics. First of all, it is the oldest art for society, because it's a matter of survival, so again. It's just like economy. The condition for a society to survive is to invent its own regulations. So, social wisdom over millennia has been about governance. So, it's a fashionable word, reintroduced 25 years from now, and coming from a corporate world. The public governance has been an adaptation by the international institution of the concept of corporate governance. Maybe you know that. So it was introduced at a moment when the idea is that if we would get inspired by market mechanisms and by corporate management, we would invent a modern way to run societies, which proved totally wrong, of course. And so many people think, oh, governance is a new concept. That's wrong. It's the eldest concept you can imagine. Because it's the eldest challenge you can imagine for society. Keeping the society in its domain of viability. That's what the governance is about. Second point is that governance is deeply linked to each culture. There is nothing as receipts for good governance, universal receipt for good governance. This is what the World Bank tried to convince us some 15 years ago. It is deeply stupid. Because governance systems is unrooted in the society. So each society has to reinvent its own governance with its own culture, with its own challenges. That's the second characteristic. But the third characteristic is that although governance systems are so different from one each other, we can discover common principles. That's very good news. Because if I have found common principle for governance, then maybe I could apply it to economy. Why not? So I tried to unveil from comparative approach what were the common principles on governance. I found 5. The first one is legitimacy. Legitimacy. Any power has to be legitimate. Doesn't mean it respects rules. A dictatorship can be seen as legitimate. Different systems of power, of devolution of power, can be found legitimate in different cultures. So what is legitimacy about? Just think a moment. What is legality? Legality is the fact that you respect predefined rules to exert power, right? If you talk of a legal power, you will say the devolution of power, the way to choose the leaders, has been defined by a constitution, by or rules, whatever, but it's recognized rules. Is a legal power legitimate? That is, when a power is legal, do you feel you are well governed? Because legitimacy is about the feeling of being well governed. Just think of Italy. It's a republic. There are rules. Do really people think that they are well governed? I suspect not. I'm not sure, I'm not Italian. But I can tell you that in France, there's a huge gap between legality and legitimacy. So legitimacy is an extremely important principle of governance. Even if you put a policeman behind each citizen or behind each subject, if there is not any kind of adhesion to the way you are governed, there will be a revolution. Because governance is about limiting individual freedoms in the name of common good. And these limits to my freedom are imposed by laws and by powers. But if I don't feel that it is really in the name of common good, that power is exercised by people who are worthwhile confidence, why should I comply to constraints? Why? So legitimacy is a major question. And I could explain how legitimacy is linked to the idea of accountability and responsibility that we discussed this morning. So building legitimate power is very critical for governance. The second, and I will go quickly about that, is participation, which doesn't mean formal democracy, but participation of each citizen to the definition of the common good, what I call democracy and citizenship, which can take very various forms, not only representative democracy. The third one is we need to have processes, institutional arrangements, which are adapted to the problem to be dealt with. It's always my image of a hammer and a screwdriver. If you want to put a screw in a wall with a hammer, you break the wall. And if you want to put a nail in the wall with a screwdriver, you just cannot get in the wall. It's exactly the same with governance. Try and imagine a way to do things which is fit to the problem you have to solve. And you will see how important is this idea about the management of different categories of good. So the third principle is imagine institutional arrangements and processes which are fit to the problem to be solved, which we could define with the concept of governance regime. A governance regime is a set of rules, a set of mechanisms, a set of way of doing, because governance is not about institution and rules. Governance is about way of doing things. That's why I don't talk about institution, but institutional arrangement, because it's a set of systems, a set of rules, a set of practices. You can take two societies with the same rules and institutions, you will discover that the way decisions are taken, the process of regulation are completely different. That's why you cannot reduce your thinking to laws and institutions, which unfortunately is generally the case. And when you discuss about reform of governance, most often than not, people will talk about changing the institutions. But it's very superficial to change institutions. It's much more difficult to transform the real way of doing. Real way of doing. You can see that, in many countries about corruption. You can invent all the control of the control of the controller that you want. If corruption is deeply embodied in the society, you will not change it by the change of institution of rules. So you can see governance as a large series of practices, of processes, and of institutional arrangement, and not only institution and rules. The fourth principle, which might sound strange for you if you've never thought about it, is co-production of common good. Co-production of common good. Most often than not, you imagine a separation between the public sphere and the private sphere. And so, spontaneously, we'll say, oh, the public sphere is about the common good, and private sphere is about private interests. And then you will say, for running the common good, I need to build public institutions. When you look at practices, you discover that is not the case. That finally, common good is a result of the action of the different actors. And that you need to invent positive regulations among those actors to produce this common good. So governance is about co-production, just like we saw this morning that responsibility is about co-responsibility. Combination of actors in order to produce the common good. And that's why, you know, the processes through which in a city you involve the different types of actors in a common goal, in a common vision, is extremely important in terms of governance. When you look at your cities presently, some of them have yet tried to undertake a transition towards sustainable societies. And others are still remaining at the level of business as usual. What is the characteristic of the first ones? A huge effort given to co-production of common good. I will give you an example. There has been recently a study about the performance of public services in Europe. And what was the conclusion? You know that there is a huge variety in the delivery of public services in Europe. I think most of you are aware of that. And probably, if you would discuss among yourselves how is the delivery of the public services in your own countries, you would discover that there are very many different practices. So what do we learn from experience about the efficiency of the public services? Something disturbing for the conventional wisdom, for the conventional debate about public service and private and the role of the market. It is that the nature of the status of the institution which delivers the service is not so important. There are many combinations in Europe of the public and the private in the delivery of transportation, health, education, fighting social exclusion. Sometimes the public is at the core. Sometimes the society will rely more on the market, regulated market. Sometimes, just like for deliverance of water, we try to combine public service with private management. In other cases, for example, in Holland, the churches remain strong in playing a role. So, can we get some general lessons from this variety? And the answer is yes. And the lesson is that for a public service to be efficient, it has to associate the consumers, to involve the people who are directly concerned. So we can see another example of what we mean by co-production of public good. That's the fourth principle. And the fifth principle is the articulation of scales of governance. Articulation of scales of governance. What do I mean? In any country, there is some kind of a pyramid of different physical level of institutions, running from international rule, the global community, or so-called global community. In Europe, the regional level of Europe, of course, which plays a major role in the building of norms or in the building of guidelines when there are no norms. Then there is a nation level. Very often, under the nation level, there are 2 or 3, even 4 different levels. What is the conventional wisdom about governance? What is the conventional wisdom about democracy? Conventional wisdom is such. For democracy to properly function, we need to know who is in charge. If we don't know who is in charge, how to decide for whom we should vote? So, very generally speaking, the institutional system is built in order to know who is in charge. Who is in charge of water, who is in charge of sanitation, who is in charge of housing, who is in charge of social cohesion, who is in charge of education, who is in charge of environment, and so on. And that has created a splitting of the governance. And this doesn't fit anymore to the reality of societies. So sometimes I ask people, is the management of the concrete society more important than rhetorics or less important than rhetorics? The general answer is rhetoric is much more important than reality. So in the name of what should be the rule for democracy, it has been decided to allocate exclusive competence to each level of governance. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Why? Because there is no one issue in our present society which can be addressed at one only level. Just think, anyone. Energy, environment, housing, health, how do you expect you can manage that at one only level? So what is key for governance is not to allocate exclusive competencies to each level, but to invent a way of articulation of the different levels. Think about water. I will come back to water after. Water, you need to be efficient at the level of the small neighborhood, including managing the cycle of water, the water falling from the roofs, going to the gardens, managing to spare water at your own tap. And at the other hand, you need to manage sometimes transnational water basin. You cannot decide that it is one good level. Of course, for example, metropolitan level will be a level at which to think the major networks or the major units for cleaning water or for sanitation. But if you would think it only at this level, you would miss the way this is embodied in a larger water basin, and you will miss the capacity to dialogue with people at the level of the neighborhood, how to be efficient in the cycle of water. So we have to think of multi-level governance. So these are the five major principles of governance, which are key to invent a new economy. I will apply that, and in particular the third principle, the relevance of the governance regime, to the question of the common good, to the question of the commons, and more broadly to the question of what should belong to the market, what should belong to something else, and what is this something else? Difficult question. Difficult question. If you look at ideology, including the recent referendum on water in Italy, you will see that the discussion is polarized. Market, privatization on one side, public and municipalization on the other side. Question is, are they both relevant governance regimes for this kind of good? I'm not sure. So, we need in economy to build a theory of the governance regimes of the different categories of good. Let's just see once again, what is the conventional wisdom about that? Now, on one side, public goods, and then they should need, in a way, public regulations, and the other side, private goods, which can be run efficiently by the market, because the market is a very efficient way to articulate decentralized production of the supply and decentralized demands. So I'm not thinking that market is out of the game. Not at all. But what is the realm of legitimacy market? That's the key question. To which kind of categories of goods and services should it apply? What are the criteria to decide about these governance regimes? Let's see the conventional discussion about what is a public good. And you open the book on economy, not on economy, but on economy, and you will see a set of criteria. And you get in some perplexity. Perplexity because they are extremely heterogeneous. Some criteria is about the destination of the good. We say health is a public good. Not, but why? Why? What is the difference between a nurse or a medical doctor and a hairdresser? It's a personal service, including knowledge, including know-how, and giving you satisfaction. So we decide hairdressing is a private good, right? We had never thought of municipalizing hairdressing. But we think that health is a public good, although it was in nature. So we decided because we think that it's a human right to get a good health, and therefore it's by the destination that you want it to be public. And of course you see political preferences between societies where definitely we think health is public, and I must say I favor very deeply this position. I think it's a real key right for everybody to, but it's a co-production of public good, because the quality of your health not only depend on public institutions, but depend also on your behavior. It's a very good example of co-production of public good. But the criteria is destination, right? Okay, so this is the first category. Then there is a second set of criteria, which is about the nature of the good, and the issue that I can't find my words in English, but some of you are economists and I know that by heart, how do you say that? No competitive use. The fact that one uses it doesn't impede the other to use it. Also the impossibility to own it. If you take the atmosphere, how can you decide it's private because you breathe the same air? Okay, so the link to the nature of the good. And third are linked to political choices about public employment. So I was not happy with this heterogeneity. And then I came to a very simple criteria, which is what happens when you share. And there I found 4 categories of goods and services. The first category is when you destroy when you share. You destroy when you share. Think of course, a historical monument. You break it into pieces. There is no history, no monument. Think of biodiversity. If you break an ecosystem into pieces, you will destroy the biodiversity. It's the same in many ways with water, with sea. So we can see that there is a first category, destroy when shared. Then there is a large category of goods and services which can be divided, but which are in limited amount. Think about fossil energy. Fossil energy is in a limited quantity. The limits of the planet. Natural resources, most of them are in limited quantity. So for the first category, the only governance regime is about protection. If it is destroyed when shared, you have to protect. The second category has to combine in its governance regime 2 criteria. The criteria of social justice and the criteria of efficiency. Social justice, because it is the quantity is not due to human creativity, it's due to the nature. Whether you call that providence of God or nature, it is given. Even it is very costly to go and get it. Demands huge technical devices. But it's given. So you have to admit that each and every human being has the same right of access, at least to a minimum of these goods and services. And that's why you cannot escape the issue of social justice. Let's see, in many parts of the world where exists a farmer agriculture and tourism, you have a dramatic example of that question. When on one side the village and the agriculture is dying with absence of water, and next to that, behind wires, you have golf with water all the day to give the possibility for the rich golfers to play their favorite game. Can we imagine it is legitimate? Can we imagine that this governance regime creates constraints which can be acceptable? In my opinion, the answer is not. So you need social justice. But also you need intelligent technique of regulations. Just think the principle that water is a gift of God, right? So I have right to the gift of God. But who is paying for the network? Who is paying for the water? What happens if I spare my water? You must know that in many systems of municipalization of water, the losses are 40% of the resource. Do we think that legitimate? Of course not. So we have to, in that kind of good, whether it be energy or water or any natural resources, you need a double criteria of social justice and efficiency. And this creates another category of governance regime. Now, the third category is goods and services which are produced and which quantity doesn't depend mainly on nature but mainly on human creativity. Evolving with techniques. In my opinion, it is on that kind of good that market is fully legitimate. At the condition, but that would be another conference, that the actors are legitimate. That we can build real supply chain which would be sustainable and fair. However, by its very nature, this category of good is market relevant, I would say. And last but not least, there is a fourth category of goods and services.
Can you give an example for the third category?
The third category?
Mm-hmm.
Any industrial production. Any industrial production. The number of computer, or the number of music, or the number of anything which makes your livelihood agreeable, which can be improved by techniques. The limitation is beyond. It's about the natural resources that you mobilize. Looking at addressing the issue of the natural resources you mobilize, for example, electronics devices, all the devices you use, the creativity is determinant to build it in as many quantities as you want, at the condition that you are able to build sustainable supply chains, including the treatment of the waste. And right now what happens, your device here, it has been, the components have been produced in very bad conditions somewhere in Asia, and once it's worn out, it will be sent somewhere in Africa with people with bare hands, will transform the wastes at their own risk. That's why it's unfair. It's not because there is a market. It's fine that you prefer Apple and you prefer Samsung and whatever. Okay, that's good. At the condition that we build sustainable supply chains. But this is not linked to the category of good, but it's linked to the kind of regulation which will make the process of production legitimate. And at the other condition on which I will come back, that the energy embodied in the building and the natural resources embodied in the building remain a second category, good and service, and has to be run by governance regime, including social justice. Do you know what part of the total energy you consume which you don't even see, because it is the energy which has been necessary for building the goods you buy, transporting it, and from cradle to grave, after the grave, to retransform it. Have you an idea of the part of the global energy you consume which is embodied in that, what we call grey energy? Has one of you any idea?
Green energy. What you said, can
The hidden energy, I mean the energy we
yeah.
consume to build up, produce our product.
Who has an idea? 1/3 of the total. 1/3 of the total. That means when you talk about efficiency for heating your house, efficiency for your car, you only address a part of the problem. Because in a monetary system, you have just no idea how much fossil energy you consume. So you can see the importance of the concept of sustainable supply chains. I come back to my fourth category, goods and services which multiply when shared. Multiply when shared. Would you think of good and service of this fourth category? Multiply when shared?
Cultural goods, maybe. Cultural products.
Yes.
Music,
Knowledge?
knowledge.
Know-hows? When you give your know-how to somebody, you keep it for yourself. And if he gives his to you, it is not, sharing is not 2 divided by 2 give 1 for each. It's 2 shared by 2 gives 2 for each. It's a completely different mathematics. So how can you imagine that a governance regime fit for a first category, destroyed when shared, could be fit to the fourth category, multiplied when shared? So we have to think of other governance regime, which is linked to mutualization. You know, what is deeply illegitimate, whatever you put it, in present economy about intellectual property. Intellectual property is a key issue discussed at WTO at length. Suspicion about stealing intellectual property is prevailing in the international discussions. In Europe, 15 years ago, pretended that we would keep our advance in terms of standard of living by being the first in the knowledge society. How could we keep our privileges with a knowledge society? Just by depriving the others from the access to this knowledge. It's a way to create scarcity where the very nature of the goods create abundance. Can you imagine this to be legitimate? So there is a strong strategies of legitimation explaining how to repay the cost for research and experimentation. Can't you remember how many billions it costs to create a new drug? But when you have created a new drug about AIDS, and you say, this is so costly, I have to get this drug very costly because of the intellectual property rights. And on the other side of the world, you have thousands of people dying with AIDS, with no access to the drug because it's so expensive. Can we really think we are building a legitimate economy? A legitimate system? Of course not. So I don't say there is an easy answer, but I say that we definitely have to invent a new governance regime about that. And it's moving very quickly. Just think of the open courses, free open courses, massive open courses, which is a new fashion. of course, from the dominant culture is a way to impose their own vision of the world, right? I'm not naive about that. But at least it had something true, which is knowledge cannot be scarce. Maybe transmission of knowledge is complicated, but that's why there are higher education institutions. That's why higher education is expensive, of course. But you cannot pretend that knowledge is scarce. That's illegitimate. So the very logics of an economy is to try and imagine governance regime fit to each of these categories. What I explained in my book is, once you've said that, in each category there are other criteria. However, there are some general principles. Take the example of water and energy. I will start with energy because fossil energy is a very sensitive question in most of the countries of the world and particularly in Europe. Well, very sensitive question. First, because it contributes heavily to the climate change. Second, because it's a large part of our deficit in the commercial balance. So, fossil energy is a second category, good and service. Many ecologists would say the good way to manage fossil energy is fiscality, taxation. This is wrong. This is wrong. Why? It seems to be obvious. The more expensive will be the good, and the less we will consume. That's a supply and demand rules. Everybody learned that at the first stage initiation to economy, the first year in university. But what about social justice? Which one of my criteria for the second category. Now, you look at the budgets of the households. You see that in our rich countries, what we call now energy precarity touches 20 to 40% of the population. That is, even at the level of energy price, most poor people cannot afford it anymore. The part of energy costs in a budget dramatically declines from the poor to the rich. Just think, in many of our countries, and I will take the example of my country, people have been encouraged to build their own house. What else? Individual ownership, security, feeling of success, whatever. Or even be certain to have access to an house, whatever. And we have developed a lot of techniques to push people to buy their own house, including very low rate long-term rent.
Mortgages.
Loans. But people could not afford to pay for the land at the core of the cities or at the immediate outskirts. So they went far away. And then they just had money to pay for their house, but not so much money to pay for thermic isolation. And maybe not for an efficient system of central heating. And they have to rely on electric heating, which is extremely expensive. So that's why in our countries, the dependency of poor people on the price of energy is extremely sensitive. So we can see that on the other side, of course, the richer you are, the more you consume energy, as an average. But what also you can discover is among the middle class, the range of energy consumption is huge. In a country like France, it runs from 1 to 10. Because part of the middle class now tries to live in a sustainable way. They have the means to live in the inner core of the city, where they get all the amenities around. They don't need a car anymore. Car is for poor people, because they are dependent on that. When you live in the center of Paris, really you don't need a car. Don't need a car. You can afford a good thermic isolation, and you decide that to be coherent with your conviction, you are not going to skiing for 1 week or going to Hawaii to spend 1 week under the sun. And the other part of the middle class will say, I want a big car with four driving wheels. I want to have holidays all over the year. Sometimes I go to the Maldives, and sometimes I go to Germany, and next week, etc. So that's why it's so different in the middle class. But as an average, there is a growth of the consumption of energy when you get richer. Positive elasticity, we say by economists. But the elasticity is less than 1. So taxation seems to be a good idea, but taxation is not fit to the reality of the second category of goods and services. In fact, I explained in my book, it would be too long maybe to explain, that the right way to address that is quotas. Negotiable quotas. Negotiable quotas is not popular right now because in the first stage it has been only related to the negotiation, the carbon markets between big companies, and it has been manipulated, and the level of the exigencies which were imposed on companies was so low that now, for example, in Europe, the price of the carbon is very low. But there has been a perspective, for example, in France, about the post-carbon city. I don't know whether you're familiar with the notion of factor 4. Who heard about factor 4? No? Well, factor 4 is a principle which is agreed upon by all prospectivists who work about climate change, who say, considering the need for development, we need to divide by 4 our consumption of fossil energy in the rich countries by 2050. 2050 means tomorrow. And so when you try to say, okay, that's nice to say factor 4, with a lot of very nice official reports about factor 4, but nothing happened really. Yes, now the link between economic growth and energy has changed. If you would look at the link, that is elasticity of energy consumption to growth 50 years from now, it was that kind of curve. And now it is this kind of curve. That's not bad. That means that, as would say the specialists, the energy intensity of our economy has declined. Of course, in a way, because the more we are developed, the more we call after material goods, such as excellent hospitals and health and whatever, and less about heating our house, of course. But unfortunately, it remains positive. Factor 4 would say that, and we've passed from that to that. It shows how far we are from the goal. And there has been a very sound analysis in France about how to achieve the factor 4. And the answer is quotas. Only is if the quantity of fossil energy is contingented at the level of the state, at the level of the region, at the level of the cities, at the level of the household, we'll reach the goal and we'll protect the planet. So what is interesting about quotas, negotiable quotas? First of all, it's multi-level, which fits with multi-level governance, because we can organize that at the level of city, inside the city, from the city to the region, from the region to the state, and so on and so forth, and organize carbon markets at these different levels. Good news. So it fits with the fifth governance principle. Second, it is progressive. Because if the people who consume less are able to sell their carbon surplus quota to people who want to use a lot of energy, then the poorer you are, the stronger the leverage effect is. All the contrary from taxation, which is socially regressive, negotiated quota is socially progressive. And if you decide to make efforts to spare your energy, then you are able to tell them those who don't want to make efforts. But there is also a third impact, which is prodigious. It is, if you talk about quotas, you have to talk about traceability. You have to know how much fossil energy you have consumed, including what is embodied in your goods and services. And some people will say, oh, that is so complicated. How can we trace that from the beginning? It has been produced in Asia, it has been produced in South Mediterranean, it has been produced in Central Europe. How could I control? But the answer is very simple. All our countries have developed value-added taxation. Value-added taxation, can you imagine? Trace the value-added from the cradle to the grave. Incredible. Why was it made possible? Because there was a tax. So it's because there is a tax that we have to create traceability, and not because there is no traceability that we should not create a system. What does that mean? It means that energy is a currency. What is a currency? It's not just dineros, it's not just euros. Currency, what is currency? You've been working on theory of currency, some of you, I suppose, as economists, no? No? Currency is something which has three functions. First function is a mean of payment. You use euros to pay. You can use a bath if you are a tailor. It's a unit of account. It's unified the way to account values from different goods and services. Unit of account. And it's a reserve of value. If you want to spare, you spare it in euros. Then you can buy shares on the financial market or whatever. But the an economist would say a currency has these three functions. And what is energy? Mean of payment, unity of account, and reserve of value. So it's a full-fledged currency. Now, let's think about Europe. Let's think about Italy. There is a crisis, right? Economic and social crisis. What is the discussion in Europe? How to combine balance of the public expenditures, growth of employment, limitation of the contribution to green gas effect, and balance of international commerce. That are the four equations that Europe has to solve. What's happened with Europe? Nobody is able to solve that. Nobody is able to solve this system of four equations. And why? For a very simple reason. Obvious reason. Any child can understand the reason why. We use the same currency to measure what should be developed, employment, and what should be spared, fossil energy. No, you didn't get the point, I can see. Okay, I start again my demonstration. We decide to stimulate employment. This will need to stimulate consumption. If we stimulate consumption in an international open market, we cannot control consumption coming from the work from outside, energy embodied in what we buy, and our own creativity and employment, right? When you go to the supermarket, once again, you don't know what you buy in terms of local jobs, in terms of Chinese job, Vietnamese job, and in terms of energy. You don't know. You just know it costs 100 euros. That's the only thing you know. And maybe you can see produced in European Union. But if you buy a shirt produced in European Union, it's enough to have put the buttons on the shirt in the European Union to decide that it is produced in the European Union. You just don't know what you buy. So when you want to relaunch consumption to stimulate growth, then you create a huge commercial deficit and you increase energy import. Now, every child could understand if you use the same metrics, if you use the same mean of payment, if you use the same unit of account for what you want to develop and what you want to spare, you will never succeed. But if you have a carbon money, currency, with quotas, then whatever stimulus you give to economy, you can decide to decline the quotas. And there you can find what the so-called green jobs. But green job right now is lip service. Okay, it's very nice to say I develop green jobs in terms of isolating housing, in terms of producing public transportation, in terms of recycling waste. But in fact, your economic tools to do it are very weak, very unadapted. So that's why if you want to think about a governance regime fit to this second category of good, you have to think of quota and you have to think in multi-dimensional currency. That is also the reasons why local currencies are developing. Think of the city of Bristol. The city of Bristol, they have created a Bristol pound to stimulate local economy. How do they pay for their Bristol pounds? With a mobile phone. With their mobile phone. I met some months ago the mayor of Bristol. He told me I'm paid with Bristol pounds. But with Bristol pounds I can pay my local taxes and I know that I buy local jobs. But it's not about closing the economy. It's not the issue. It's the issue of understanding what is stimulating internal economy and what is needed to manage international exchange. So you can see how one passes from the idea of economy to the idea of economy is a branch of governance, then to say I have to apply my principle of governance, then to say one of the principles of governance is that you don't use screwdriver for nails and hammer for screws, as simple as that. And then you wonder what are the categories of goods and services and what are the good screwdrivers and what are the good hammers for each of them. And then you come to this kind of very concrete question. Right? No, now I open to question now. Thank
Okay,
you.
the floor is open to questions.
Sorry, it was I brought you with probably avenues that you would not suspect. Everybody is exhausted, I think.
I just wanted
You
to
are
ask,
very courageous. Good luck.
two things. The first one is about what you said on immaterial goods that are not naturally scarce, and I do really agree, and I really liked your theory of the fact that it shouldn't be locked into any property rule, and also, although I do really agree with that, I don't know the answer, and I would like to know whether you maybe thought about that because you mentioned it. A solution to the problem of when these goods actually cost, producing these goods, for example, like the research for a drug or these kind of things, it does actually cost, and the justification for locking into property is often that, as you said. So how would you reply to such critique, which is usually made into this approach? Because I think it is very interesting. And the second question is about the last thing you said about the quota method. And do you think why do you think anyone in Europe but in Bristol have already, like at the political and economic place, have already implemented this method? What do you think? Is there like some pattern of resistance against that because of some reason it would not be accepted by the mainstream neoliberal framework? Or
You raise very good points, friend. Very good points. Not only you are courageous, but you're very relevant. Well, on the first question, I have not all the answers, but we can make some remarks. First of all, the marginal efficiency of research on drugs has dramatically declined over the years. There has been the study, I can't remember whether it's European, I think it's European or French, no, European, last year, saying among the new drugs which has appeared over the last year, which percentage proved really efficient in terms of improvement of health. It was a terrific figure. I can't remember whether it was 3% or something like that. 3% was really useful. Now you have to look at that figure. Probably you find it on Google. So there is a kind of technical innovation for itself, which has become socially inefficient. That's the first point. Second point, 20 years from now, we published a book on research and progress of humanity, where was discussed the question, do we know enough things for general well-being? And the answer was yes. That is, the engine for technical innovation is no more human well-being. It's keeping the engine going on. Right? Third point is there is now a process of auto-destruction of property. Look at books. People want to be read. And books arrive for free more and more on internet, whether it is wanted or not, as for music. So in any case, because of the nature of the technology of information and communication, we have to invent new things. Think once again about the Harvard courses on massive free courses. So even now, there is a process of invention of new governance regime for this kind of good. So, I mean, once you understood the condition for legitimacy, you have to elaborate. I don't pretend, my book have all the answers, but you know in which direction to look at. There's also the idea, the notion of reducing the time for property right. There's also, to combine research and development with the diffusion of knowledge. I mean, there are a lot of things to be invented. So, second question. First of all, maybe you can see on Google once again, but we are more and more to think about a carbon currency. I'm not isolated, I'm not just producing my book and say, I found the truth all alone. For example, Miliband, when he was English UK environment minister, launched the same idea. Presently, carbon market has not a good image in Europe for bad reasons. Because carbon market among companies, in a way, has been the first step towards negotiable quotas. But first of all, it has been seen by ecologists as a way to transform nature into a commodity. Think, how can we sell nature that way? How can, we can exchange the right to pollute. Exchange the right to pollute. But it's not the good way to look at it. I understand why they did that. At that moment, that was right, There was a risk of commodification of every part of the nature. which is introducing everything in the neoliberal order. So there has been a resistance to that process, you know, transforming anything, the air in a commodity, the soil in a commodity, water in a commodity, and so on and so forth, you know. And therefore, marketing of that, transforming that with value, was the same as saying, okay, the golf player can pay water, higher price than the villager can die, but we want to play golf. You know, that has been assimilated to this negation of social justice about natural resources. Because it was limited also to big companies. But the major reason is conformism. No radical thinking. People are entrenched either in a neoliberal or in a neo-Keynesian thinking. The idea that there could be multidimensional money. People who say, how you want to withdraw from euro to go back to the Italian currency or to the Greek currency or to the French currency? What move backward, you know? They don't understand that we need multidimensional currency. That is not about withdrawal from euro. And there is also another reason, which is international commerce. When I published my book, I had a very interesting exchange with Pascal Lamy, which was at the time the general director of WTO. And he answered me, there is no obstacle in the rules of the WTO about building future international commerce based on sustainable supply chains. But there will be huge resistances from the emerging countries saying you are creating immaterial obstacles to trade. So we need, of course, an international negotiation. I will tell you a very interesting anecdote. Very interesting. It was during the Copenhagen negotiation about climate change. You heard about it. Copenhagen negotiation, 2009. At one moment, the Chinese delegate said, hey, we are ready to limit our carbon emissions. But a big part of our carbon emissions relates to the goods that we import. So we should integrate that in your own quotas. But then the commerce minister slapped on his hand. Why? Because if he would keep saying that, we would move to a negotiation to WTO, including the notion of sustainable supply chain. And as their supply chains are unsustainable, including low efficiency in the use of energy, then they would lose their comparative advantage. So they slapped his hand, he withdrew immediately. But you see, we are on the verge of discussing these points. But there are so huge interests from emerging countries, from the companies, from the main obstacle is conformism. The inability to think about the predicaments of our present economy. I would like to give you two quotations. The first one is from John Maynard Keynes. You heard about him, I suppose. What did he say? Which is absolutely accurate. Political leaders are the slaves of economists whose names they don't know and who have been dead for long. That is, there is through university, through many ways, reproduction of an ideology which is presented as a science, and nobody dare challenge this conformism. And the second quotation is from the Nobel Prize, Paul Krugman, from the US. who wrote in the New York Times, so it was not an activist sheet of paper, New York Times. Agreed upon ideas are stronger obstacles to change than vested interests. It's exactly the illustration of what I said this morning. Mindsets, conceptual system inertia, ways to reproduce it through higher education, spreading it to all the elites. Harvard vision of the world, spreading over all the world through the elites. The system of the World Bank, taking people who are fired from the finance minister in their country, give them an official position, just to recycle them. Bring them to learn the new mantra of liberalism. And so, when they will go back to the business and become minister again, they will be formatted. That's as simple as that. And you are the victims. Yes?
As I am a geographer, I was really interested in the chapter of part 2 dealing with territories.
Sorry, I'm deaf.
Excuse me. As I am a geographer, I'm really interested in the part of that you're dealing with territory as an institution, a new kind of institution, as an actor. Mm-hmm. And I would like to know in which manner you are defining the role of territories, okay, and also how can we consider community related to that kind of territories in order to avoid the risk to exclude some others.
Okay. I was not going to speak about this chapter, but if you allow me for 10 more minutes, I will enjoy to do that. When you're thinking about economy, you have to think, as I mentioned, about institutional arrangements. Who will be the actors of the future economy? Which are yet emerging is a key question, because a system without actors does not go very far, right? So, to understand the answer, you have to go through an intermediate concept of pivotal actor. Pivotal actor. What is a pivotal actor? Pivot. Yeah? Pivot again?
Pivot.
Pivot. Pivotal. Pivotal actor.
Pivot. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. You see what it is. Okay. Pivotal actor is an actor which might not be the most strong in terms of power, the biggest in terms of importance, but it has the ability to organize the other actors around it. So, what are the pivotal actors of the 20th century economy? States and big companies. Those are the two. They are so powerful that some people think that they are here forever, that they will remain forever. When you see discussion about militants, among militants, for example, they will explain, we are helpless. Look, major companies are bigger than powerful states. You remember the very famous list of economic size among the 50 major actors in terms of size. It's a mix of some big states, like US, of course, and of big companies. But big companies are larger actors than the whole of the African states and most of the other states either. So people feel helpless in front of that. But now you have to understand why they have become pivotal. Because in terms of employment, yes, they represent only a very small share of the total employment. Even if you can describe it as an organization with hundreds of thousands of employees, it remains very small at the scale of the whole world. But they organize 40% of the international commerce. They have organized globalization around their own system. They organize a vast system of subcontractor, independent subsidies, clients, research centers, and whatever. So they are really pivotal. They have organized the supply chain around themselves. And the states have organized the social relationship among actors around themselves. They have organized most of the norms. So what do we learn from these two pivotal actors? Is that to organize economy, you need the crossing of an actor which is organizing I would say, the horizontal cohesion, and an actor which organizes, if I may say, the vertical cohesion. The first is the state, the second the big company. Now, why did big companies become so powerful? Because they were fit to the challenge of their time and the situation of their society at that time. How did the big company emerge? By their unique ability to combine workforce, capital, and knowledge, technical knowledge. And in terms of, I would say, biodiversity, they were the new collective animal most fit to the industrial revolution. Just as states have been the animal fit to organize the new scale of economy until the 50s. Until the 50s, talking about national economy still had a meaning. And most of our regulation, first of all the Keynesian regulations, were addressing national economies. Now the question is, for the 21st century and for economy, are they fit? Once again, it's an issue of legitimacy. Aren't they screwdriver for nails or hammers for screws? Unfortunately, they are. So, one of the major issues is to think of what will be the pivotal actors, able to organize the coherence between the social, the economic, and the ecologic. And then I looked around and found two pivotal actors, because I wanted two, one horizontal and second vertical, because we need that to organize a society. And I found the horizontal one will be the territory, and the vertical one will be the global supply chain. That's why I pay such an attention in my book about the notion of sustainable supply chain and sustainable territories. But now, what is the territory? What is the link with the community? Territory is a very familiar word in French, very difficult to translate in English. Sometimes it's translated by community. Let us describe territory as a physical space with political institutions. If you look to a road map, you will see physical space and some crosses which describe this is a region of Piedmont and this is the city of Turin and so on and so forth. So spontaneously we look at territories as this kind of thing. And when you think about the economic action of a territory, most often than not you will describe the economic action of the local authority. So there is very often a confusion between the territory and the local authority. Now what is a territory about? It's about a community.
The relationship.
It's a human community, territory, concentrated in one area. which you can describe that employment basin, housing basin, networks of public utilities basin, and so on and so forth. But when you really try and see what is specific, because no one community of that kind is autonomous. A lot of migrants with a lot of links with their own homeland, just as you are. You are Turinese, but you are part of it, but in fact your links are all over the world. There is no such kind of thing as autarcy. Any territory is highly dependent on exchanges with the outside world. There is no such thing as closed information system. You're open to the whole world. So I came to the definition that territory is a knot in a system of relations. A density of relations, a combination of the different types of relations. So we have to look at that. And then you have to ask yourself, define that way. Territory is not an actor. You can describe it sociologically, say, yes, Turin community as a local society with its own culture, with its own structure of power, with its own networks all around the world, whatever, but it's not a collective actor. So one of the major issues for the coming decades is the emergence of this new type of actor. Just the same with supply chain. Supply chain is a conceptual notion. But as I explained about Total, and Erika wrote this morning, when I explained how Total could say, I'm just irresponsible about what happened in the destruction of the coast of Brittany. It's just because there is no integration of the supply chain in one actor. So it's a concept before being an actor. Therefore, one of the challenges of the decade will be to transform that in actors, to create a comprehensive responsibility on the supply chain on one side, to build international commerce on sustainable supply chain, and then to help to the emergence of territories as major collective actors. So it would be too long to explain. I described in my book how do you become a collective actor. How do you perceive yourself? And it's going on. I mean, I'm not describing something very abstract. There is more and more conscious of that. When you see, I mentioned the mobilization of the different actors towards the transition, it's an expression of the emergence of a collective actor. And because common good is produced by co-production of common good, it's a strong push toward thinking yourself as a collective actor. And therefore, I also discuss the point, what are the assets of a territory? Because an actor acts with assets and with flows, right? Just like a company. It has assets, capital, and it has operational capital, flows of goods transforming. So, okay, capital circulant, I don't know how to translate it in English. Okay. Everybody knows that. So what is it for a territory? And I describe 4 kinds of capitals. Material capital, the infrastructure, housing, factories, engines, and so on. It is material. Just the same for a company. Second, there is natural capital. Quality of the soil, quality of biodiversity, quality of waters, resilience of the system, ability. And then you enter in an ecosystemic approach of diversity, of resilience, and then you address the issue of closing the cycle, developing cooperation, just like in a living super-organism. So, natural resource, natural capital. Then, third, human capital. Series of your competencies, of your know-how, of your relations with. And often when one speaks about human capital, it is what we have in mind: how many educated people, higher education, diversity of the work market, and so on and so forth. But we made the essential, which is immaterial capital. And what is immaterial capital? It's not licenses, it's not intellectual property. And you understand that when you compare different territories, compare different communities. For example, how to explain that two communities are confronted to the same catastrophe. And one reacts very strongly and transforms it in a creativity process. And the other feels hopeless and is destroyed and calls for solidarity from the rest of the world. How do you explain the difference? How can you understand that one country with huge natural resource like Argentina saw a steady decline in its standard of life, and a country like Korea with no natural resources became a developed country? How do you explain that? With human resources, no. There were a lot of educated people in Argentina, and probably a lot of illiterate people at the end of the World War II in Korea. So, you cannot explain it by natural resources, you cannot explain it by human resources, you can't explain it by material resources. So what is hidden? What is hidden is immaterial capital. That is all the training processes which has built the learning of the community in how to address things together, how to build together common goods, how to overcome divergence in interest in the name of the common good. And this is a long process, which can also be called culture. Culture is a very important resource in terms of resilience of territories. But who knows, who told you about immaterial resources, immaterial capital? Hardly anybody. It's just completely ignored. I have a very interesting little anecdote about that. Poland and Armenia. Poland and Armenia were under the rule of the Soviet Union until the fall of the Berlin Wall. Remember that. And they had been dominated by socialist economy, for example, for farming, even if Poland had kept a very strong private, small farmer system. 2 or 3 years after, emerged cooperatives, emerged mutual funds, emerged microfinance. There were a lot of small systems, you know. Where did they come from? Did they come from international advisor rushing to Varsovia or Erevan to explain how to do? No. There was a nation tradition which had been kept inside the families, the memory of that, the training of the know-how of that. How do we do together through 70 years of domination? And that's why culture is so important, you know. Culture has to be seen not just as music or art or something like that, but all the training through society to how do we do together. I will give you a wonderful example of immaterial capital. In Africa, in Mali, there is a small ethnic which is called, you've heard about it probably, the Dogo. Dogons, I don't know, you say it. Very small, living in the surrounding of Bandiagara. I was there and visiting a village, and there was there a strange hut. You had a platform and you had a roof. But what I could not understand is why the roof was so low. What? I said, what is it? They said, oh, it's a place where we discuss. Place where you discuss? What do you mean? Yes, it's very functional, because once a guy gets excited, he gets up. And he sits down again. No. it's incredibly intelligent. Incredibly intelligent, you know. How to regulate the passions. You know? So each society has sometimes been extremely clever in inventing way to confront interest, to build common good, and they have to renew it, to reinvent new ways. But the same with Emilia-Romagna. Everybody is fascinated in Europe by the industrial districts of Emilia-Romagna. The way small companies have reached access to international commerce through cooperation. We try to imitate them. We don't succeed. Because it's a long story. It's a long story. It takes a lot of time to build all those small mechanisms, building technical education. The same with Switzerland, you know. How do you teach entrepreneurship? You've heard in Switzerland, the clockmaking industry was in the worst position to have access to international commerce. It's in the mountains, the Jura mountains, far from everything, very cold at winter, and this is the very reason why they developed clockmaking, because there was nothing to do for the small farmers during winter. So over the years, they learned, to complement their resources with mechanicals, and then creating clocks and so on and so forth. And there was a huge crisis of clockmaking 20 or 25 years or 30 years ago. And no one would have bet a penny on the future of this region. Except, of course, that by chance Hayek developed Swatch and renewed the clockmaking. And you go there now, and it attracts thousands of migrants, daily migrants from all the surrounding in France, which was a much better position to access to the market. But they had developed technical school, tradition of entrepreneurship, links between the entrepreneurs, complete change, just like in the industrial districts in Emilia-Romagna, you know, and it's extremely difficult. It's easy to invest, but to transform it in an immaterial capital is very difficult. So the building and the maintaining of the immaterial capital is a key feature for the territory. And last word is about ignorance, which I mentioned this morning. We need to develop new management tools for territories, because a city like Turin has no knowledge of its own metabolism. And if we don't know something, how do we expect to manage it wisely? So we have to identify what are the different capitals, understand that immaterial capital is key, understand why it will be a pivotal actor, and create the institutional arrangement and the processes through which it will emerge collective actors and new tools to manage metabolism. So it will take decades, but it is underway. It is underway. What happened at Rio Plus 20? I told you the failure of Rio Plus 20. Every page, the state themselves wrote, that's the new role of the cities. That's the new role of the local authorities. That is, there is a growing consciousness of this new role of pivotal actors. Those actors, which at the 19th century seemed actors of the past, compared to the emergence of the unified Italia, French Republic, and so on and so forth, the local territories seem actors of the decline. And I call that the revenge of territories, to recognize that they are among the main actors of the 21st century. Is it enough for explanation?
Thank you.
Do you have time for another question? If anyone...
Have all the night. Not you, but
Anyone?
when you are old, you have all the night.
I have more questions.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah.
You
Um, there's another concept that, in my opinion, it's really, really interesting in your book, that it's exergy.
Okay. Okay. Who has ever heard about exergy? It's not a new concept. But you know, the greenhouse gas effect. When do you think it has been discovered? 1992? 1986? At the moment when we started to talk about climate change? No, 1 century before. The same with exergy. So there are concepts which have been existed for long and which have been used as, just like we have to go back to economy. Sometimes you have to go back to old concepts. What is exergy? Some of you, I hope, is familiar with thermodynamics. I will, for the others, explain briefly. When you have electricity, you have energy, and you can use it in every way, right? To have an engine turning or to heat your house, transforming in work or transforming in heat, right? If you have water at 30 degrees, it still is energy because the surrounding is only 15 degrees. So the gap between 30 degrees and 15 degrees is energy, but very difficult to use. You can use a heating pump, you know, but the part of energy that you can take out of that is very limited. You can use it as an exchange of temperature to heat the air or the water getting in the house to produce some heat. You will be never able to manage an electric device. You will not be never able to have a thermic motor producing work for you. So you can understand that all that is energy with different levels of quality of energy. And what is olive oil? What is olive oil? Olive oil, there is the first grade, press it cold, and you have first quality oil. But if you stay at that level, you will only extract a small part of the entire potential proteins of olive. So you divide in many different qualities of oil. And the lowest grade would be chemical extracted oil. It remains olive oil. So exergy is the total potential of the energy you import or you produce. And therefore, building an efficient city is to use the most of this exergy. And the current situation is you use only a small part of energy. So there is two ways to look at energy efficiency. The one is to look, for example, at energy intensity, which is the ratio between gross product and consumption of energy, which is an immediate measure of efficiency. But there is another one: which part of exergy did you use? But it was exactly the same with your grandmother. Grandmother, we would have shirts of good linen or sheets of good linen, and then it become torn off. Do they throw that away? No, they transform it in for washing the dishes. And once it's too old to wash the dishes, you keep it to clean your shoes. And then even at the end, you could transform it to mend something, you know. So any traditional society had a tradition of taking the best of the limited resources taking the best of exergy, for example. But we have lost the knowledge of that, also because there is no interest to do that. Once you create a carbon energy, then you will see a dramatic move toward a much better use of exergy. And you win on two sides, because, for example, all the heat, all the energy, all the part of exergy which is not used, is destroying the atmosphere at the same time. So you lose it on one side, and you destroy the other on the other side. So the tools for managing exergy is a very good image, first, of the need to take the best of the scarce natural resources and to create mechanisms such as quotas, such as management of metabolism. And you know, many cities now will decide to use the heat created from the production of electricity to heat the houses. But 50 years from now, it was very strange, you know, to say, we have to combine the building of central producing energy with housing. Now it has become familiar, so there has been a real positive move. People started really thinking about that, but Mauricio is a great specialist of the food supply chain. And you remember 50% nearly of the food produced is wasted. What is the exergy there? All the energy embodied in your consumption is just thrown away. And you spend a lot of energy to recycle the garbage. It's stupid. Okay?
Thank you.
Mr. Calame, for being so generous with your time
Oh, well.
and with your thoughts. And we hope you'll come back to us as soon as you can.
Well, you know what I would love is that you get involved in a way in a collective process work. For example, what I mentioned this morning about thinking about responsibility, thinking on your own countries. You know. For example, I can give you, there is a very good study done by our Indian partners on how even now responsibilities is embodied in the national constitution in many Asian countries. And it is not in European countries, you know. If you look at the European treaties, responsibility is not in the preamble. So there is no official reference to responsibility, which is strange, because if you look at the culture of Europe, it's very much based on social contract, that means on co-responsibility. But it has been put aside by the institutions. So if you would be interested to be part of a collective process of how to develop the level of education for consciousness, responsibility in the different fields, including the academic, including the professional that you will be. And also think, what is happening in your own countries? How to push forward the internationalization of the legal regulation? That would be extremely helpful and a way to keep our discussions together.
We will certainly develop that institutionally and on an individual basis. Possibly you know that this college was instrumental to the writing of a report for the G8 in 2009. It was on global legal standards.
Really?
We do have that report and we'll send it to you. And this could be
Well,
the beginning of a new French.
thank you. Well, but I think, you know, you must understand how exceptional you are. I mean, a small group of people from so different countries with the will to spend 1 year together